We good, Stephen?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Good morning and welcome to the ASPPPO special meeting, November 30th. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And Mr. Secretary, do we have a quorum?
Madam President, we have a full complement of directors, so we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome. I wanted to take a moment before we get going to do just a little bit of housekeeping. The CSA board workshop on land management rules has been scheduled for December 15th. And Dana Guazzo and I will be representing ASPPPO. If any of you board members are interested in attending, just let me know and we'll figure something out. Moving on, I wanted to set the context for today's special board meeting. And starting with my thoughts from our first board meeting back in January, as I was reviewing ASPPPO priorities. At the top of the list, and I'm going to quote myself here, is the $500,000 revenue shortfall under which CSA is operating. We cannot sit by while our quality of life and property values are put in jeopardy because of outdated infrastructure and few capital improvements. The residential property owners, as a combined unit, have the largest financial investment in Sea Pines by far, and this is our community. So we're going to fast forward and do a little word on the 1974 covenants. And the Association of Sea Pines Plantation Property Owners and the Advisory Board are protectors of those 1974 covenants. And we are granted the power to protect those covenants, and ASPPPO must approve a referendum. In our efforts to fairly represent our members and communicate with you, we posted on our website the board package, which includes the agenda for today, the resolution that we're going to be voting on, the list of critical infrastructure projects and cost, as well as the legal referendum language. We also solicited questions from you so that we can address them during our discussion today. And I want to thank the property owners for responding to us. I appreciate very much your engagement with ASPPPO as well as your candor. Some questions and some of the comments really didn't have to do with today's referendum, so we will get back to them at another time. And a lot of the questions that came in were similar in nature, and I sort of put them in a couple of buckets that we can go through, and then I'll get to some individual questions and board afterwards. I think the one that raised that we got the most emails on, the biggest question was the sunset clause. And the question that came across was, why not set it to end in 5 or 10 years if additional money is required? Why can't we vote again then? Why can't capital costs be listed and planned and done when the referendum comes to an end? The use of a sunset clause implies that required maintenance ends when the $51 million in funds runs out. And at the end of the $51 million, we feel like there's always going to be more maintenance required. I kind of think of it like our own houses, and you replace your roof, you know you've just replaced it, but while you're spending the money, you know it's going to wear out at some point in time, and you're going to have to replace it again. You know, when you think back with your homes, how many times have you replaced a refrigerator, or your air conditioning's gone out, washer and dryers have gone out, and my favorite is the dishwasher. We all know things wear out over time, and that includes our CSA assets, our roads, our drainage systems, our infrastructure. They all have some type of expiration date. And yes, we want to cheat that as much as possible and get as much wear and tear as we can. But we've gotten too much at this point, and we're in the middle of a never-ending cycle. So I guess it begs the question, why would we want to put a sunset clause in here when we all know and we've all lived through the fact that our own personal property wears out, and we know that we're going to have to replace it at some point in time. You look around at, sorry, Bill, you're asking a question, or? Sorry, you're on mute. Bill, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to make a comment. During the CSA meeting where the resolution was voted on, I offered up an amendment to put a sunset clause in there, 10-year sunset clause, and it was not seconded nor obviously voted on. However, after processing that and talking to some of the staff at CSA and some of the other board members, I've turned around on that, and I agree there should not be a sunset clause on this, basically for everything you've just stated. But I did want to bring that up for this meeting.
Oh, thank you, Bill. Thank you. And we will have a board discussion once we go through these questions. I just wanted to get through these first, and then we'll come back to the board. When we look around and we look at the residents that are living here, I think we're living with what I call a double punch, which is decades of deferred maintenance. And that's due to things beyond our control. There were bankruptcies that have gone through, as well as the perennial underfunding.
Paula, you're frozen. Paula, can you hear me? You were frozen. We lost your last few words. Was it just on my end?
No. No, it's everywhere.
She froze on everybody, I think.
Oh, yeah, I just got a sign saying your internet connection is unstable. Gee, thank you, Spectrum. Is it better now?
Yes.
It is better? Okay. I'll go back. Where did I mess up?
You in the double
Audibly.
whammy.
Where did the audio go bad?
You in the double whammy section.
Double punch. Okay.
Double punch.
Residents here are living with a
You're frozen again, Paula.
Paula, you're gone again.
control. It was due to bankruptcies and things that had happened well before we got here. But the perennial underfunding, we have lived through that. And I think we all accept that we are the oldest community with the least amount of assessments. When the $51 million runs through, there's going to be more maintenance needs, more replacements, more repairs, and they're not going to be covered by capital reserves. Will this be forever? And the answer is probably not. But the thought here is that it will be up to new boards with new residents and new representatives and new perspectives that will make that determination. I feel like it's really, I mean, it's imperative that we leave this community better than we found it for future generations. The next question was, how is the money spent? And what is the breakdown of the projects and what are their costs? And is there accountability to ensure that this money is not wasted? So I asked Stephen if he could do a shared screen for us and put up the list of CSA critical infrastructure projects for the next 10 years. I'm not going to walk you through all of this, but I just want to say that it is posted on our website for your review. It's located in the board package for this meeting. It's also posted on the CSA website, and there's a link to it on CSA's homepage. And the money that we pay for this goes into a special fund. And it's going to be called the Infrastructure Improvements Fund. And as listed in the referendum, it may only be used for repair, replacement, addition and improvement of the roads, bridges, bulkheads, leisure trails, stormwater facilities, and systems located in or servicing sea pines. And there's also a very separate accounting for these expenditures. So it's a straight list, there's straight accounting. The money's not going to go to a community center or a pool or anything that comes out of left field. This is very specific and very targeted. You might also notice, though, that on this list are primary access roads listed by name. But you won't see secondary roads, and you won't see some of the oceanside T streets that have come into under such poor repair. They also need work, but this is the priority. This is the primo of what needs the work done. There was another question that came in that was kind of related to this about the word bulkhead that was used and in the list of the infrastructures. And the question was, does this mean that we are now going to be responsible for the marina bulkheads at Harbortown and South Beach? And the answer is no. Those marinas are owned privately, so the CSA is not accountable and none of this money will be used there. The next question or bucket was, who pays into the critical infrastructure fund? And what is the percent increase for property owners and the resort? And the percent increase is pretty much equal between the resort and the property owners. The resort will pay 0.25% of their adjusted gross revenue. And that represents a 50% increase of the 0.5% that they are now paying. So that's a 50% increase. Property owners are paying, their $600 increase is about 50% of the $1,110 that they will be paying. So when you look at, are we keeping it pretty square? The answer is, or is CSA keeping it pretty square? The answer is yes. The appropriation is pretty much a math question that relates to property value, to assess value. Property owners, if you look at the assessed value, which is set by the county, are responsible for about 95% of the property value here behind the gates. We are being asked to pay about 95% of the new assessment. And that equates to over $3 million, 3.325 million, somewhere close. The commercial and the resort make up the remaining 5%. And the resort pays in the 0.25% that we just discussed of their adjusted gross revenue, which is about $125,000, and then commercial pays in about 40 grand. The total comes to 3.5 million, which is the number that CSA has been working with. There was a new question that came in, and I'm going to ask Dave Ellis, our secretary, to answer that one. And I'll read it for you, Dave. I'm confused by some of the language in Article 5, Section C of the new referendum. It states that the commercial tenant annual association by landlords on behalf of their tenants will be adjusted annually in the same manner as the residential property owner's assessment. But then the last sentence states that beginning in 2023, their assessment shall be increased annually for 3 years in the amount of 0.04 for the first floor and 0.03 for the second floor. It can't be adjusted both ways. So which way is it? Dave, if you. Dave, I think you're on mute.
Okay, I'm off mute
Here
now.
we go. Okay.
It actually is both ways. If you look at the Article C in the referendum, it starts off, for example, on the first floor is 36 cents per square foot for first floor tenants. Let's just deal with that. So that will be increased by the CPI, the same as the RPOs are increased. But in addition, they will have that 4 cents for first floor tenants added to them, in addition to the 36 cents adjusted by the CPI, plus then the additional cents listed in there. The next year that becomes their base, and then the CPI will be on that base, and then they will pay in year 2, they'll pay 3 cents. So, you know, it's a calculation of both ways. So it's not, you know, it's not as, well, it's just the way it applies. So the CPI goes to the base, and then in the first 3 years, there'd be an additional increase, which is also then added to the base for next year.
Thank you very much. Stephen, I think we're good with the shared screen, but thank you very much. Okay, good. Thank you, Dave. The next bucket of questions is the flat fee fair? And there was one quote, I pay the same amount in the referendum for my 2-bedroom condo as Arthur Blank does for his mansion. And the answer is yes, that's the way it's set up. The special tax district consideration appropriated monies based upon property values. The referendum we're looking at today is a result of what I call blowback from unhappy property owners regarding the special tax district. The tax district would have billed, let's see, we have like plus or minus 40% of our property owners that live, that reside permanently out of state. And the special tax would have billed them very differently than the residents that live in state. So the referendum was not as a result of property owners balking at paying their fair share. The fairness, the approach or the perspective on fairness changes very quickly. And it depends on where you live full time and the value of your Sea Pines property. Looking back as we came into Sea Pines, I think we all have the shared experience of a property purchase here. We knew then that there was a flat fee annual assessment, and we all bought into it. The referendum is a continuation of that precedent. It was interesting, in one of the emails, one of the members shared with us that 2 of his neighbors had sold their Sea Pines residence and moved to Kiowa after growing so frustrated with the lack of upkeep and enhancements. So again, what's fair? It depends on where you live and how much your property value is. One of the other buckets that we got was some very nice positive input, which I was pleased to share with you also. Some declarative sentences: get this approved. I own 2 properties in Sea Pines and plan to support the referendum. I'm in favor of the referendum. We're all in this together. Homeowners, resort, commercial properties, and owners should not view it as an adversarial relationship. So moving from the buckets, there were some very specific questions too. The verbiage regarding the resort and commercial interests complicate the referendum, and it is no longer straightforward. And I read that like 3 times, and I'm thinking, okay, if I understand this correctly, one of our property owners believes that only property owners should pay an increased assessment. And I believe, and I think that the board would agree with me, that a better situation is when all Sea Pines constituents have skin in the game. We are all part of the Sea Pines community. The question came up, have the boards considered a bond issue? And again, I'm going to throw this to Dave, if you could help us out there.
If anybody is familiar with the issuance of bonds, an underwriter requires a guaranteed source of revenue that they can use and have a lien on, for which they can as a source of repaying the bonds. And that's generally taxes. Taxes have to be paid. You lose your property, it goes to tax sale. Assessments don't have to be paid. If they're not paid, the only way they get paid is when the property is transferred. So assessments is not a guaranteed method of revenue that underwriters generally would rely on for the purpose of issuing bonds. So it's just really not available.
Okay, thank you. The next question, is this proposed increase more than the 2019 referendum? And the answer is yes. It's based on newer and better research and information. I'm going to take the liberty of reading just sort of an explanation of where the costs came from to make sure that we're all on the same page. The 10-year expenditure cost estimates were developed using several documents and resources. The first is the 2016 hydrology study that looked at our community's drainage needs for the next 25 years. The second was a recently new completed Sea Pines Capital Reserve study. The study, conducted by an outside consultant, itemized CSA's physical assets, which were the things we've been talking about today: roads, leisure trails, bridges, facilities, vehicles, and equipment, and estimates the cost and year of replacement of each asset based on its current condition. The study looks out more than 10 years, but it does not include repairs, improvements, or replacements of drainage infrastructure. Based on these two studies, current observations of infrastructure in the field, the actual reconstruction costs for recently completed Greenwood Drive and Lighthouse Road projects, and the bids that CSA received last month to reconstruct and rebuild North Sea Pines Drive from the Ocean Gate to Lighthouse Road, CSA believes that they now have a solid understanding of the infrastructure needs and their anticipated cost. So when I say new and better, it's pretty much new and more comprehensive information. So thank goodness for that is my answer there. Will the new amount be added into the annual fee or a separate standalone fee? My understanding is that the annual fee, this annual fee will be a separate line item on the annual assessment. Does the referendum change the covenants in any way? And the answer is no. Do we still have the 75% voting requirement? Yes, we do. Based on forecasts, is this the last increase in new fees for 5 years? I imagine that it would be, but I would be the last person to try and predict the future. And I think our colleagues at CSA would agree with that. Why is the language, whereas SPR is the successor in interest to SPPC, why is the language in the referendum? And I'm going to ask Dave, our secretary, but he's also a retired lawyer, and I call him the current student of covenants and associated documents, to respond to this question. But before I turn it over to Dave, I wanted to sort of separate the question of successor of interest from the referendum that we're talking about today. And the reason is whatever understanding or misunderstanding that exists between the CSA and the resort over the 0.5% or the 1% of the adjusted growth revenues remains untouched. That is a separate singular issue. And the referendum that we're talking about today adds an amendment which calls for a totally separate bill paid separately by the resort and property owners, and it's accounted for separately. So we're kind of looking at two different things in my mind. And Dave, I'm going to ask you for some more clarification on that.
Okay. I am going to put my lawyer hat on, and so follow me a little bit. I think that, that because this issue is coming up, or the comments are coming up, I think we need to know a little bit about how everything arose. And so I'm going to give you a little history first to talk about. On the first amendment to the 1974 covenants was in 1987. And at that time, the corporation was in bankruptcy, and it was done by Hilton Head Liquidation Corporation. And that's the corporation that succeeded to Charles Frazier's companies. So they called the referendum, and what happens under the covenants. The Second Amendment was in December 1, 1987. And at that time, Sea Pines Plantation was the owner, and they were the successor, and they called that referendum. On March 16, 2006, the then owner, Sea Pines Associates, was dissolved, and its property and rights were transferred to Sea Pines Resort LLC. The next year, very next year, the Third Amendment was adopted. That's 2007, the year after the resort became the owner of the assets. That amendment identifies the resort as a successor in interest to Sea Pines Plantation Company. That's the exact language that people are now questioning we're using. It was used in 2007. And it's used because somebody has to call the referendum, and there has to be a party to call the referendum, and the resort was considered deemed the successor in interest according to that referendum and those boards and those people at that time. The Fourth Amendment was adopted on May 9, 2013, and it again contains the same language that Sea Pines Resort is a successor to Sea Pines Plantation. So if anyone is thinking that there's something nefarious with the proposed amendment, just remember that whatever was done in 2007 and 2013 for whatever merit it had. There's nothing new, there's nothing different in this proposed referendum. But somehow people had obtained a copy of a 2015 memorandum from attorneys, which went to ASPPPO. I call this a position paper. It's a paper that we attorneys do outlining the position and the argument in support of something our client has requested. It's kind of like, if you think about it, briefs to a court. Some people take that memorandum as a statement of law, but an attorney will give, for one side, present their brief, their arguments, their case law in support of their client's position. We're advocates to a court. The other side will do the exact same thing. And the court then will determine which combination or neither are correct and make a decision. So these memorandums or position statements of briefs are not a statement of law. They are a position that attorneys are advocating to support their client's view on something. So I want you to also think about that memorandum was in 2015. It was issued after the 2007 and 2013 amendments were adopted, which had the successor in interest language. And for 9 years previous to the memorandum, since the date the resort had been exercising the rights of Charles Frazier and with the benefits of Charles Frazier, they knew all of this when they wrote that memorandum. So when they make a position, they state a position as they see it according to law. They know that stating something doesn't make it true. And they went back to the law. So if it just doesn't cause any concern now, because if anybody's concerned about it, it was already done in 2007 and 2013. But whatever effect it had, and apparently the attorneys who wrote the memorandum, didn't consider it had any effect. So this referendum, as Paula said, was crafted and created with an entirely new and separate assessment, and not an increase in the basic assessments already in effect. And this was done intentionally. And one of the reasons for that, not only to isolate the amount of money and be identified for certain types of projects that are contained in the referendum, it could clearly be accounted for. The other was not to create an issue over whether or not the resort should pay 0.5% or 1% on the basic assessment. The basic assessment is not affected. Now, I know there are people, and this is going out of the lawyer thing. I know there are people who are looking for a reason or an excuse to vote against something. There are always people who just, going to be against something and they want an excuse. This is just not the reason. This absolutely has no bearing on anything. And it always interested me when I was practicing attorney and I did a substantial amount of local government work, that we knew whenever something was presented, that 10% of the people who would oppose something would always be the same 10% of the people who opposed everything. The other 10% of the people that opposed something, or the other side of them, were people who had particular reasons that it affected them in certain ways. And we understand that. But to look for a reason when there is none as an excuse to kill something is just looking for an excuse for you to vote against something. If you want to vote against it, you have to vote against it. You don't need a reason if that's what you want. But it is time for the community to realize that whatever is crafted will not please everybody. People will have different opinions on the amounts of money, the time, and this, that, and the other. But at some point, if a community is ever going to get something and make it work, we all have to put aside our individual desires. It doesn't have to be our way or the highway. We have to know that our opinion and view was considered fairly and honestly. But when the decision makers make the decision, after that is done, we should unite and bury our own particular desires, and it's not done exactly the way we want it. I add that editorial because I'm real strong with the fact that, if you're going to have something, you have to have unity, and people have got to come together. And that means we all have to take things that we don't like and decide, can we live with that for the better good and the common good? That's the only way things get done when you're in the government area. And when this is government. So I just add all people to make a decision for themselves. Is what you're talking about so important that you're willing to condemn the community to continued failure and deterioration? With that, I think, are we at the point to make a motion?
We're close. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave, for that. Are there questions from the board before we go to motion? Dana.
I have a few, thank you. I have a few questions, and it's really for clarification, not because I'm trying to challenge it, but I do think some things need to be clarified. First of all, when we talk about it, you pointed out that the line items that are laid out as for the infrastructure needs are largely primary roads, and the secondary roads and the T streets, things like that, are not listed out. I just would appreciate it if Sam or Larry or anyone else on the board could clarify where the money will come from to repair the secondary roads as need arises.
Sam?
You're on mute, Sam.
You're on mute, Sam.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The secondary roads and T streets, those roads aren't listed as part of the $35 million. Those are going to come out of the $1.6 million a year annually that's at the top line of that spreadsheet. So there's about $16 million a year that's set to use in those roads within the interior neighborhoods. And then additionally, there under the $35 million, just $14 million worth of drainage improvements that can be used on those T streets and those interior roads as needed, so that we're not building on top of failed drainage and trying to replace those roads. So that's a very good question. There, within the totality of the $51 million, those roads are included when you add the current $16 million available over the next 10 years and the additional $35 million.
Okay, I think that's important to clarify, because I think the way it's been discussed in some scenarios, in the way it's listed out, could make people think that the primary roads leading to the resorts are the roads that are getting all the attention. And I think it's important to clarify that the secondary roads that most of the residents live on are not being forgotten in this effort.
No, ma'am, not in any way, shape, or form. The $16 million and resources from the $14 million will be taking care of those roads in ways we can't take care of them now.
Okay. And then one thing that Paula mentioned a few times is the fact that this is going to be paid with a separate assessment, a separate billing, a different line item. Does that make sense in the fact, I'm just asking for clarification, since money is coming to repair roads and drainage, there's some overlap as to where bucket the money comes from. So does it make sense to have, how does it, I'm not sure about the billing and the accounting, how that looks and makes sense to people.
Well, may I speak first and I'll throw it over to you, Sam. Just from a homeowner's perspective, Dana, the most important part of this referendum is that it is a separate amendment. It is not a change to the annual assessment. It is a separate
I understand that. I understand that.
And for property owners to be comfortable with that, a separate accounting is going with it.
I understand that as well. But
Sam, you try.
No, that would be the approach I would take answering the question, Dan, is because we know these are additional dollars and it's a big number. We wanted to be very clear and transparent about how those dollars will be accounted for, where they were coming from. And so we felt like approaching it this way, having them billed separately and accounted for separately was the most effective way to do that.
So let's say that you have a storm drain that results in a secondary road being repaired. So would you first deplete the 1.6 million in the infrastructure that's already accounted for with it, and then pull money as you need to from the other fund, if that other fund also includes storm drainage monies? I guess I'm asking, where does it come from first in a situation where there's an overlap?
So it would come from both buckets of money. Under the reserve study, the $1.6 million will cover the milling and the repair of the road. But the reserve study does not have any drainage dollars in it. So what we would do is we would take the cost of the reconstruction and rebuild of that road, and we would pay for the milling and the overlay. We would account for that out of the $1.6 million, and then we would pull necessary drainage improvements out of the $14.4 million and merge those two together to pay for the cost of the project and lay that out there for MEMP and finance and ultimately the board to see very clearly.
Thank you. I think that's important to clarify for people, because we're talking about reevaluating the money as we go, to see how it's being used and whether or not that 600 that we're assessing property owners needs to be revised over time. So I think it is important for people to know what they're looking at as to being revised.
And Dan, I just want to add, the most important thing about the new fund is it can only be used for the infrastructure. And so,
I understand that.
And so while it may be that there'll be money used out of the general fund also for infrastructure, this money will never be used for things that aren't covered by the infrastructure. And so clearly, and I think Sam would recognize as well, this will not cover all of our infrastructure needs. Secondary roads, as they collapse, may come out of this fund. But the point is, this is a restricted fund, and so this will never be used for anything else.
Could the $1.6 million that's part of our annual assessment be used for anything else?
Typically, those dollars are set forth through the finance committee, and the way CSA does it is they set the operating piece over here, determined based on what they need for operations, and then they take the revenue piece, the remaining revenue, which is average about $1.6 million a year, And that's what's available for capital and infrastructure spending. Actually, it's closer to 2.1 or 2.4 when you throw capital in. So that's why it's so important, Dana, and for this board and the CSA board and for the community. These dollars are not programmed ultimately by CSA staff. They're programmed by the community through the MEMP committee and the finance committee. And so then by making the commitment to the $1.6 million, we put a stake in the ground to do the projects and do them the way they need to be done. We need to have the $1.6 million available for capital. So because that comes out of the general assessment, the answer to your question is yes, you could reprogram it for other things, but by putting out this $51 billion infrastructure list and saying to make this work, we've got to have the $1.6 million moving ahead to go towards this on a 10-year basis, and we need the additional $3.5 million. You know, we're saying to the community, these dollars have to be there, and I'm saying that to the board, we're saying that to MEMP and finance. So could you move 1.6? You could. Will we? Absolutely not. To make this work, we've got to have those two numbers work together to get the $51 million over the next 10 years.
I think it's important for people to feel confident that there's not going to be some kind of shell game played with that 1.6 million that's not defined in the.
All I can tell you is from a staff's perspective, from the board's perspective, from the MEMP committee's perspective that's approved this, and the finance committee's approved this, there's not going to be any shell games. There can't be for us to do the things we need to do. We don't, the dollars have to go to infrastructure. So
I understand. I just want to make sure that people hear that and that that's been made very clear.
Are there any other questions from the board?
Yeah, I have a couple, Dan.
That fast.
Am I on mute or am I okay?
You're okay.
Good, okay. Thanks for sending that information to me, Paula.
Mhm.
These are questions I think you answered already. These were questions from a couple of non-resident property owners who live around me and are going back home. And I think you answered it. And our failed referendum, I think it would have been started in 2019, was calling for a total of $450, basically 150, I think would have started in 2019, 150 in 20 and 21. So starting in 2022, we would have had 450. And now we're starting with 600. And I think what I heard you say, and as an explanation, Paula, the failure might have been a blessing in disguise. We're saying that now we've got new numbers and go, oops, we really need $600 a year rather than 450. Is that the reason why we have a difference between the two numbers?
Well, yeah, but the new numbers is based on new research.
No, I understand that. What you're saying is what I'm saying is that's the reason why we're
Yes.
up to 600 is because we have another set of numbers.
Yes.
If we had it approved in 2019, we'd be underfunding it from what I could gather.
That's correct.
Okay. So that answers the one question. That's a little bit better answer than I gave to the property owners, but that's the same thing. You also answered the general revenue that the 0.25 would come up. You pretty well answered that question. 125 a year plus CPI, and I think 40,000 is what you said for the commercial, right?
Correct.
Okay.
5%. Yeah.
Huh?
5% of the total funding.
I'm just
Property
asking.
owners are
I just
90.
wanted numbers. That's all. That's what. Now, what happened? Another question. What happened to the simple referendum being talked about? I'm saying that is, if I recall, and correct me where I'm wrong, anybody and everybody, the one that failed basically called for a total of 150 bucks a year for 3 years. Didn't call, and 0.25% up. I think the commercial and the resort were the same. And that was all we were voting on, if I recall. There was no amendment to the 74 covenants, or correct me where I'm wrong. That seemed to be much more simplistic than what we're doing now. Am I correct?
I
Dave,
think
Sam,
now is the most.
Larry? Huh?
Can I, Dave, do you want to answer this before we say, or should we, Larry?
You know, Larry, why don't you answer this one? I can answer it, but we'll go ahead and answer it so you have it.
Paul, the 2019 referendum included roughly 12 and a half pages of legalese and included changes to the Article 3, which were controversial because they included statements that could have been read to settle the issue. That's one thing. They included the building of the gallery shops, which this money cannot be used for. And as I think we've indicated, the board has no current plans to do. They included money for our tree removal and tree problems that this doesn't. And so we kept this to a very simple one-page, 1.5 page, two-sided amendment, a very simple article. We kept it not to stepped up numbers where you had to figure out which would be at any given year. It's a single number. So we think it's a much simpler referendum and that everyone's got a simple number to pay for. It is a new article that doesn't include any other outside issues, as David Ellis has just explained.
Good. Okay.
It doesn't include a lot of things that were included the last time.
Okay, that's good. Thanks. The other one, this is just based, I didn't think about this. What we're talking about is getting a referendum, whether it's more simple or more complicated, or that we still need to get approximately 120 more people to vote for it rather than vote against it. And I'm using simplistic general terms because that's how much we did not get that caused us not to get the 75% plus one. So you sent an email to us, Larry, that kind of explained, and Dave, you talked about a little bit more about the inclusion of successor in interest. Now, if it's already clear in the previous ones, why are we stating it again here, which would seem to me be fodder for those that are concerned about it to begin with? I'd be very surprised that the vast majority of property owners would even recognize this successor in interest as a controversial thing. And I don't know if it clarifies or confirms anything. I'm concerned that all it does is just causes those that really don't want to vote for it to say, well, that's an even bigger reason. Why are we including it in here? Because this document that we're going to, it would be just as good if we didn't have that statement in there. Is that correct? And that could be Dave, Larry, Sam.
Well, not necessarily exactly. According to the covenants, it's the Charles Fraser company has to approve the covenants according to the covenants. And, so somebody has got to specifically approve it. And this is their approval by them calling and assisting in calling the referendum. And the only way they have any ability to do that is if they're considered the successor in interest. Now, whether that's correct or not, that's the way that it's been done since 2007, 2013.
Yeah, I'm questioning. So what you're saying to the uneducated like myself is that any future amendment would have exactly the same wording in it.
Yes, it's got to
be in there.
It has to either be in there or some other method to do it.
Okay.
I have explored that with our attorney, and that and Larry was on that call as a lawyer too.
Okay.
And the attorney highly recommends that we stay with the same procedure so that there is no chance of somebody, if it passes, saying it didn't get the right authorization because there are people on the other side, and then try to defeat a referendum that's passed.
Okay, good. Okay, that clarifies it for me. Thanks a lot on that particular one. And then the last question, I am concerned about this getting passed. I don't see anything in here that would cause me to think that 120 more people will vote yes that didn't vote for the 2019 thing. So it sounds like what we're saying to our property owners is it's this way or the highway, guys, the highway being the special tax district, because we're going to generate $51 million per year for forever, or whatever the number is. And we're going to do it one way or the other. Now, if I'm a non-resident property owner like my neighbors, they're going to vote for this thing for no other reason as they know they're going to pay more potentially than $600 if you have a special tax district. So what is it that we're trying, how are we going to market this as a better reason to vote for it now compared to all the efforts that was done to get the 2019 approved? That's a question to ourselves. Nobody has to comment on it, but I guess maybe it goes to Larry because the CSA board is the one that's got to get this thing done. Larry, how do you think this is going to play to the populace? The fact that this might be the better of two alternatives?
Well, Paul, I guess that's certainly one thing I hope people will keep in mind, but I put it slightly different, not that it's the better of two alternatives.
Yeah.
That this community has to step up to the plate, as David indicated earlier, and fix itself. We have a now crashing roof. And so this board, for the last year, under Sam and my leadership, has made it clear that we are going to find the funds. We're not going to continue to kick the can down the road, and we're going to do everything we can. The special tax district had a lot of appeal in terms of the number of people who have to approve it. The residents, property owners came back and said, we don't like that. We think a referendum will pass. And so the board will do everything we can, communicating. We will send out texts. We're putting together a video. We're going to write letters. We're going to regularly send emails. But at the end of the day, it is the community that has to decide whether they're going to step up to the plate and fund ourselves. Whether you're resident or non-resident, a renter or a full-time person who's lived in his house all the time, this place is falling apart. And truthfully, anyone who's living here right now, we just had over 2 inches of rain, and all you have to do is ride down any street and see the drainage ditches filled with water because they aren't draining. You can see crumbling streets all over the neighborhoods. So the answer is the CSA will do everything we can, but it truly is going to be each of us talking to our neighbors who aren't here and writing and basically saying, do this, because I think it's fair to say our board, if this doesn't pass, which will be a tragedy, we will go to the next.
Sorry, Larry, say that again, please.
If it doesn't pass, we'll do something else.
I missed it. You're saying basically what the board's saying, we're going to get it done.
Right. And if this doesn't pass, we will move to the next step. We're already working on the next step. And if for some unlikely reason that doesn't pass, we've got a third and fourth. We'll keep going until we fund this infrastructure.
Okay. I like the answers. Thanks.
Any other thoughts before we call the question or put a motion on the table?
Dana has her hand up.
I think one thing also that this would do, it's my understanding that the town helps out with some of the drainage repair, but it's more of a patchwork type deal. They won't fix an entire road. So Sam, you may comment if that is true, number one. Number two, how this will help us enhance maybe the complete repair of that road, not just the collapsed area.
Thank you for the question. The town does come in and do a couple of things for us. One, the first, they will come in and do point repairs. And so that's a very good example you use. If a drainage system, not even a system, that implies more than it is. If a piece of the system collapses, they will come in and they will do a point repair on the system. If they have the dollars available in the budget, if the budget has already been turned, and if their contractor is available to do the work. Understand the town of Hilton Head, who's a great partner of ours, by the way, they do a good job of the resources they have, but they don't have a crews to come in and do this. They contract the point repair work out. Over the course of the last 5 years, they've averaged about $210,000 a year of point repairs inside of CPINE. So we've been able to get some resources out of them, but the town of Hilton Head's overall budget is much, much more than that, and they have a large island to take care of. So the struggles as it relates to repairing the system for emergency, yes, when we get the town to come in, they will fix a certain spot if something breaks, but it doesn't fix it to the north, or the south, the east, or the west. And then the town's major function is actually what they're doing right now is the Lawton Canal Pump Station. Unfortunately, we are not having to put dollars into the Lawton Canal Pump Station, which drains about a third of our community, but probably more importantly for the town, drains most of Coligny. The town is working right now to upgrade and repair that pump station, and they're putting significant dollars into that. So we do get dollars from the town. It is emergency repair dollars, unless it's a larger project like the Lawton Canal Pump Station, that's a regional project, but the town will not come in and if we repave a road or come in and fix the drainage system under the road. They're not going to come in and upgrade the drainage systems. They're not going to come in and be proactive about it the way that we are talking about doing with this project. So the town's a good partner, but that's not the business that they're in.
Thanks.
Any more, Dana?
One thing about the amount of money that property owners put in versus the resort and commercial, just for clarification. It's been mentioned multiple times that it's a 50% increase for property owners or for the resort. Could you put an estimated dollar amount to that? So of the $35 million over 10 years, for example, in dollar amount, how much would you anticipate that would be paid for by the resort?
Dave?
First of all, it depends on the way it's calculated. It depends on the adjusted gross resort revenues.
I understand.
So as the revenues increase, the amount they pay increase. So the revenue decreases as it probably did during this pandemic year, it will decrease. But based upon the last year that we had, they were putting in approximately a little slightly over, I think it was $126,000. We rounded it to 125 for May. So if it just stayed the same, if you want to run some what ifs, multiply 125 times 10 years. And you'll have the amount, it again depends on as the revenues increase, which normally has been happening, it will be a little larger, but that's approximately amount. Percentage wise.
So maybe 1.5 million.
Well, times, 10 times 125, and you can adjust it from there. That's 1.25. And if it goes up, it may be 1.4, 1.5 or whatever it is. I mean, it's all you can do because you can't see into the future. But, so I always use when I do these things based on one or two factors. One is what we know as of the previous year to make calculation and just use that. Or I look back and see what their increase has been over the previous 3 to 5 years. And then I would add that increase in each one of the 10 years, assuming that they would probably continue the same thing. The most conservative analysis would be to just use that previous year and just assume there would be no increases just for the point of having a figure. And that's the way I would at least do it for purposes of, thinking about it.
Okay. And the other question that I had, and it's not, it's with this, I think this whole 75% plus one is a kind of questioning the logic of that. The referendum says at least 75% of the vote, right?
Has to pass by 75%.
So there's no plus one. It's 75%. It's at least 75%. There's no plus one in the referendum.
It's kind of like, I would say you're right. It's kind of like when people say you get a majority. Majority is a half plus one.
Right, but that's not what we're saying. We're saying at least 75%. So it's just 75%.
That's what the covenant says.
So I think that's misleading, not intentionally. I think there's a misunderstanding of what at least 75% means. And also another thing that I think is maybe needs to be made, maybe it is clear to the board, but what is 75%? Is you know, you could have, for example, you could have out of, and I sent a spreadsheet to Paula and to Larry before this meeting, a short table that if you want to put it up on the board, on the shared screen, or I can share it if you want, but you could have a big spread in the number of people who vote yes. And depending upon how you calculate 75%, you could have as much as 25, 30 counts different and either be considered 75% or not. For example, if 5,000 people vote, you could have 3,726 people say yes, and that's 74.52. That rounds to 75.
Doesn't round, can't round, has to be the number. You can't
Has
round.
to be the whole number. Then if it's the whole number, then it has to be, okay. So if it's 74.98, that's not 75.
I mean, that's the way I understand math, is that,
That's not the way I understand math. That's not how you round to a whole number.
well, but it doesn't say
You round to a whole
There-
number to get
There
75.
is no rounding.
there is no rounding. There is no rounding. It's a whole number. There's no rounding. That's the same thing you go when you go and counting votes on anything. There's not a rounding. It is a number.
Okay.
And if it comes out to be an unusual number, you know, it's just got to be that number.
Okay. I think I just want to make sure that that's clear. So it's no rounding at all. It's 75%.
That's what the covenant said.
Okay. I'm just making sure it's clear. So there's no +1.
Well, you're correct. Well, Larry, you want to speak to that?
Our bylaws, and I pulled up the covenants. The covenants say in the event 75% of the votes actually return to the company, so there's no rounding. The bylaws say 75% +1. And so, and I hope it becomes an unlikely event that we get to exactly on the dot 75%, the covenants will control. But the likelihood of that, I guess it could happen.
It could happen. And I just think
The
that
covenants
if
have
that's
said-
what the bylaws say, maybe they should be redone. But I just want to bring that up before we end up getting to a count issue and make sure everybody understands what the rules are for counting. And the other thing I want to say is, and then I'll end my comments, is I was opposed to the last referendum. I voted no on that. And I made sure that that was in my statement of why I wanted to run for the ASPPPO board. That was one of the reasons. And one of the reasons that I was against it is the fact that I didn't feel the money was clearly laid out, what it was needed for. And I questioned its use for the gallery of shops and that whole deal. And I asked at that time, a year ago, that if it could be made much more specific and just deal with the things that are really critical, that I felt that that was the way to go with a referendum. And that's what I do think we have here. So despite my questions are not challenging. My questions are for clarification and making sure everybody's issues are addressed that I've heard of and that I've thought of. But I want to say that based on what I've heard and based on what I've read on social media as well as here, I plan to vote for this referendum. And I am, in a way, like Paul said, glad that the last one failed because it wasn't going to be enough to handle the critical infrastructure. We weren't looking clearly at where we really critically needed the money spent. So I'm glad to see that that's being addressed this time. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Dana, yeah, thank you very much.
Paula, I'm sorry, Paula, I have one more question. I want to be a good citizen and a good, this is a question I think you already answered. The question that was asked to me is, whoever sent you that first note, how come Arthur Blank can pay $600 and some guy that has a 2-bedroom can pay $600? If I understand it right, if you want to change that to make it, he pays $800 and this other person pays $200, that has to be done by a referendum to change the covenants. Isn't that correct?
Yes,
Yeah, the covenants right now is a flat uniform
flat
fee.
fee.
Good. I feel comfortable that I gave him the right answer, but I just want to be sure of that. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. I want to thank you all. I especially want to thank Larry and Sam for joining us today to help us sort through all the issues. I will entertain a motion now for the resolution. Dave?
I would like to move that we adopt the following resolution. Resolved that the Association of Sea Pines Plantation Property Owners, Inc. and the Advisory Board approves the amendment to the covenants of 1974 covenants, Section 5 Infrastructure Fund as presented and attached to the minutes of record. We will attach to this resolution the copy of the proposed amendments, so it will go in the minutes. And that's the motion.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Bill. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? How will, and maybe you were going to talk about this next, but to encourage people to vote and to let people know when they receive information on this referendum that their POA, the Sea Pines POA, is encouraging them to vote in the affirmative.
Well, there are a couple of steps I'd like to take moving forward. The first is to send a letter to probably all the residents of Sea Pines versus just ASPO, to let them know that this issue was taken up by the ASPO board, the result of the vote, why we voted in favor of it, and why we think that the residents should vote in favor of it. That would be the first thing. The second thing would be, as we see any questions arise or as more questions come into us, they will be answered. We will be corresponding with our membership base by electronic email more frequently during the referendum vote. Barry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I'd like to say, first of all, I'm obviously pleased with the decision we made today. And I think that one of the things the residents need to understand about both boards, this isn't just a matter of voting. This is really about support. And it's important for all of us, and I'm sure we all will, but to just restate it for people that are listening, that we'll do everything we can as individuals to help get this over the threshold. I mean, it's just so important because we know we've got so many homeowners that are on the sidelines that do not participate in this. They're ill-informed, not necessarily of their own volition. They've got other lives going on elsewhere or whatever, but it's just very important for us to really encourage other people, friends, neighbors, reinforce it as best we can to get this passed. And I certainly will do that. And I know all the people I see on the screen right now will do exactly the same way. I'm doing it more for people that'll be listening later. So thanks so much. And I thought I'm glad to see that we addressed all the questions that came in.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. I mean, really, we here at ASPO are not going to please everybody every time, but it really is one of our objectives to listen and to hear what comes in over the transom and to respond. And I feel like that's what we've done today. And together we can work this out. I mean, together we are Sea Pines. I just want to say thank you for joining us. I wanted to share, in closing, I wanted to share a quote that came in from a fellow property owner who could probably sum this up, I think, better than I can. Quote, "I have strong hope for referendum passage so we can move on to what needs to be done. We cannot squabble while this very special community deteriorates." So with that, I'll call for adjournment. Do I hear a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Second, we're adjourned. We'll take a 5-minute break and then come back. And if any questions came in during this session, we will answer at that point. Fair enough? See you in 5.
Won't be seeing you in 5.
Paul, have we got many questions?
Hey, Dave, I sent you something.
I got it.
Yeah. Twixt us. I gave it to Paula too.
Okay.
Thought a couple other pieces that go with it when I get through digging, you might find interesting.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Paula guilted me into it though.
Well, that's okay. It's good to know you can be guilted.
Let's,
that's right.
let's
And
welcome back. Let's move on to the questions here. Thank you very much. While we were away, I'm not sure, we received 2 questions, and one of them I think must have come after we had our conversation, before we had our conversation. It's what is the approximate amount of funds expected from the resort and businesses to determine the $600 amount. It's the resort and the businesses pay over and above what we pay of our 600, and we went through that before. This was an interesting question. Are Sam and Larry back? Are they here?
That's great. Yeah.
I think they are. Okay. This is a question that says CSA currently maintains the secondary roads leading to people's homes. But in some developments, we have to pave our own to reach our homes because it is not part of the CSA's responsibility. I'm assuming that's part of a regime fee. We all pay the same assessment and would like to see if there is a way for CSA to care for all the roads. I know for a fact that Lake Forest and Carolina Place roads are paid separately by the owners of each development. I don't know what the history is on that, and perhaps you all would be able to help. Larry, Sam?
Paul, it's my understanding that on those communities, as well as some of the townhomes and the condominiums, that those properties, when they were built prior to CSA being involved, being around, and this is how it's always been set up. We do provide resources as it relates to drainage for those communities, because we're under a master drainage agreement. But when it comes to specific pavement improvements and those things within those areas, at this time, we do not. And I do not know if the CSA board in recent years has accepted any new roads or private, well, they're all private roads, but any roads from additional regimes or neighborhoods like that into the CSA system. I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
I'll just add to that in fact exists based on the way that these areas like Lake Forest were sold by the developer. But again, all of the drainage costs and even the main roads, everyone uses those main roads to get into their neighborhood or to get to wherever they're going, whether they're going to the beach or the golf course or restaurants. So the assessment, in fact, covers a lot of things that you use, and clearly to try and break it down into what we don't pay for, what we do would be almost impossible. But there are several regimes, not as many as there used to be, but there are that in fact are privately held.
Sam and Larry, I live in Pine Island Court, which is off of Pine Island Road. And now this is probably was a number of years ago. We had 2 roads and we asked if the CSA could pave them. And the answer was, you'd have to bring the quality of your existing roads up to current CSA standards. If you did that, then we would take over the future repair, replacement, what I'm going to call, of those roads. And that's what we did. And CSA, for what's needed, which is probably maybe a couple of patches in the last 10, 15 years, took care of that. I don't know if it sounds like we're not doing that now at all, but that was the one way that this particular regime was able to get our roads maintained and taken over by CSA, and that was to spend the money to bring them up to the existing CSA standards.
Paul, that's certainly a fair and reasonable approach. Since my time as president, I have not been approached by a regime to do that. If I was, it was something we certainly look at. and have a discussion at the board level about.
Okay, fair enough. I want to thank you all again. And just on a happy note, I don't know if you all realized it, but today's the last day of the 2020 hurricane season. So anyway, onward and upward. So
And we received 2 inches of rain.
We've been blessed, though.
Anyway. Thank you all so much.
All right.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.